The next thing that we're going to look at is just a real quick view of how to value real estate, commercial real estate primarily. And we're going to use a function called capitalization rate, or cap rate. We're going to really simplify it here just so that we have the basics down. If you think about a cap rate, that's the expected or realized rate of return on a particular building, looking at a real simple measure of income called net operating income. So if we think about the three areas that would go into coming up with a value, we would have NOI, or net operating income, and we would have the value, and we would have another function which would be the cap rate. So the cap rate, if we think about that, is our return on investment, or our ROI. And a value is just going to be the price of a building or a big project, kind of whatever you want to think about it. Now, the way the simple math works is, let's say that we have a building that recently sold for $1 million, and it had net operating income, which is all your rents. Generally, it's your rents minus all of your operating expenses. Let's say that it had $100,000 in operating a net NOI. So let's say our value is $1 million and our NOI is $100,000. Well, our cap rate is just simply our value divided by our NOI. Okay, so our cap rate is 10. I'm sorry, the other way around. It will be our NOI divided by our value. Our cap rate is 10%. So we'll go ahead and put that in a percent. And so it's a very, very simple, straightforward process. But let's say that we, for example, we look out at a bunch of buildings that are similar to ours, and they have all sold for a cap rate of 10%. And we know that our building has NOI of $324,456. Then the value of our building is simply going to be our NOI divided by the cap rate that makes sense. So if we look around at all the other buildings very similar to ours that recently sold, and we come up with the cap rate for each one of those buildings, and then we'll average those out. We're not going to weight them, just keep things simple here. And we'll just say that our buildings are generally selling for cap rates around 10%. That makes our building worth this value here. And if I put that in dollars, it'll be a little easier to see. So if we have NOI of $324,000, our building is worth $3.2 million bucks. And let's say that if we look around, and most of the other buildings that are worth that have NOIs of $100,000 are selling for $1.2 million. That would mean that buildings like that are selling for cap rates of around 8%, which means that our building with this NOI is going to be worth about $3.8 million. So let's see how we would deal with this, where we have a couple of example sales, and we want to figure out what the cap rates are in the market, and then what that would mean for our own building. Let's say we have building A, building B, and building C, and these are ones that have recently sold. And let's say that building A, we have NOI. Let's say that we have rents, and we have expenses, and over here we have a sale price. And what we want to do is we want to calculate our cap rate. And if we have rents in this building of $234,546, and rents in building B are $187,900. Oops, I don't know why I've got a percent there. Let's go ahead and just drag this down so I don't end up with some of those crazy things. Let's say we have $189,765 for our rents there, and we have rents of $345,236 on building C. And let's say our expenses on building A are going to be $200,000, and our expenses on building B are going to be $125,000. Let's say our expenses on building C are going to be $287,000. Oops, $287,000. Well, now we know if I'm just given this information, and we have sale prices, various sale prices, but we can calculate what our NOI is. Our NOI is going to simply be our rents minus our expenses. So we have NOI of $34,546, NOI of $64,000, NOI of $58,000 for building C. Now let's say that building A sold for $500,000, building C sold for $575,000, and building C sold for $600,000. Now our cap rate is simply going to be our NOI divided by our sale price. And I can just copy that formula down. And we'll go ahead and put those in percentages so they're easier to see. So now we can see that our cap rates here are 6.9, 11.3, 9.7. Normally if these are similar buildings, these cap rates would be much more comparable, but I'm just kind of making up some numbers here as we go. And let's suppose now that we want to estimate what our building is building D, and we have rents in our building. We'll just use some round numbers here. Let's say $200,000, and we have expenses in our building of $150, which gives us an NOI of 200 minus the 150, NOI of 50. And we want to come up with what our building is worth, or what we think the sale price might be. So first we're just going to take a simple average of these cap rates here. And in Excel I can just use the average function and just highlight those values, or I could certainly add them up and divide by 3. We come up with a cap rate, an average cap rate of 9.3%. And all I'm going to do is take our NOI and divide by that cap rate, and I get a value for my building of $538,045.59. So if this is kind of the market for buildings like mine that have recently sold, and I'm trying to figure out what my building is worth, I'm going to probably price it somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $550,000. We're saying here that it's worth $538 that people are generally paying for this. And if I want to know, is my building more like this one or more like this one? If it's more like this one with a low cap rate, I'm going to probably get a much higher price. Again, lower the cap rate, the more my building is worth. The lower the cap rate, the less risky the market thinks that building is. This is the required rate of return to buy that building. This building with this NOI, I'm happy to make only a 6.9 or 7% rate of return. With this building here, it has NOI of $64,000, but the people that bought that thought, man, that's pretty risky. If I'm going to get this NOI for that building, then I need to make a pretty high rate of return of 11.3%. So that's how we do it. That's how we'll estimate value of my building, taking a look at some previous sales. So you might be asked in a problem to come up with just what's the cap rate for buildings similar to these, and that would be this 9.3%. But you might also be asked, well, if my building has NOI of these, then you'd need to take it to that next step and then divide your NOI by that cap rate, and you'd come up with a value for that building. Probably don't need to show you how to do that on a calculator, because it's just adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, just real basic math. There's no finance functions. But you certainly could use your basic calculator and do all these same steps. You probably would need a piece of scratch paper to maybe write some of these values down, but certainly calculate that pretty darn quick on a calculator.